My name is Chidi. INEC announced the results at night and nobody celebrated. I think that kind of sums up everything, really, about the election. You would like to think that, when elections have been this anticipated for this long and the contest supposedly as keen, then when the results are announced, at least some people will be happy. And even if you're not, even if you are not on the side of that's been announced as winner, that at least you will express some relief that the tension is over, right? But this is the first time in Nigeria since presidential elections began in 1999 that nobody has dared celebrate the results of the elections. And in my own lifetime, I've seen every presidential election in Nigeria since 1999, although I was a kid since 1979, although I was a kid in 1979. And this is the first time in that period, okay, that there's been no celebration at all over that 45 or thereabouts year period. It's also the first time that the results were announced at night, about the time when witches and wizards are returning from the covens. All right? And I think there is not much else to say about it. It's also the first time that respectable people from around the world are unwilling to congratulate the winner. And even some people who have, like the former president of Liberia, Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, have had to delete their congratulations. It says a lot about what we have tried to do. But the dreadful thing about it, I think, is that more than any other thing, it's the willful and egregious manner in which the INEC under Professor Mahmoud has destroyed willfully and deliberately all of the progress that a generation of Nigerians has made trying to build up dependable electoral administration, particularly since Atahiru Jega, not Mahmoud, Atahiru Jega, since Atahiru Jega began in 2010 to try to transform that. In 2 election cycles, Mahmoud has totally destroyed, ruined all of that. And that's why what is done is unforgivable. I'm sorry. About money. Look, when people come, focus on the money, I think we miss the significance of what has happened. It is more than about money. It's about destroying the hopes of generations, because it's not just one generation. Okay? There were people in their 60s who were voting for the first time in this particular election. And I'm sure that those people would have been willing to accept defeat if the electoral administration was credible. And, I use myself as an example. I have never supported Muhammadu Buhari. I would never support him. In 2015, I did not support him. I could never have supported him. But Muhammadu Buhari won cleanly and clearly in 2015. And when the results were announced in 2015, on an afternoon in 2015, all of us sat down, stood up and sang the national anthem. And I did, very happily. Right? Now, the point is that in an election, nobody's entitled to win an election, but everyone is entitled to believe that an election can be administered fairly and credibly. What INEC has done is destroy belief in the possibility of credible electoral administration, and with it destroy the faith of more than one generation in the possibility that the political process can yield credible outcomes and credible transition. That is worth more than 300 and whatever billion that people are talking about. And now, many more young people in Nigeria are talking about how they are going to escape, how they are going to Japa, how they are giving up on the country, It's knocking the stuffing out of more than one generation. That's why this is that difficult. INEC was not, if you recall, my view was very clear that I was quite skeptical about the promises of INEC that everything was going to be hunky-dory and somehow we're all going to um, end up with a fantastic election. Now, first thing, the numbers have not come out. I've not yet, if they have, then I've not yet seen them. The tallies for um, the number of people who voted in the federal legislative elections, that is House of Representatives and the Senate. That's important to get. Because when you say BVAS worked and the accreditation part worked, then I would expect that in an election in which everyone voted on the same day, the numbers of people who voted in the federal parliamentary elections would not be substantially different. Of course, I'm not saying they would necessarily be the same, but the numbers of those who voted, when you add up all the turnout in all of the 109 National Assembly seats and 109 Senate seats and 360, House of Representatives seats, the numbers will not be significantly different from what you have in the presidential election. So if we are being told that BVAS worked, number one, you and I will have to believe that the number of people who turned up for this election was 27% of which is what INEC claims, right? Number two, the number of people who turned up will be exactly are approximately the same between the National Assembly elections and the presidential elections. Do you believe that? That's the problem. That look, this is my point. That we're not talking about just INEC and money. We're talking about INEC destroying willfully everything about elections, including the numbers that they've released, because almost assuredly, the numbers that INEC released of turnout bear no relationship to what happened on the day. By the way, I'm just addressing your point about BVAS. I've not talked about the interface, the BVAS IREV interface, which was quite manifestly subverted by human agency. And the only human agency that could have subverted it lies within INEC. And there is no way that the INEC chairperson could not have done that. And if you then therefore look at this, and then I think 3-4 days after the results were released, we then get told, oh, you know, a High Court decided in January that INEC can determine the nature of transmission of results. Of course, that's what the Electoral Act says, which is how INEC came to determine that results were going to be transferred digitally, right? With the BVAS device onto their so-called IREV. And then on the day, it was shut down. And rather than the chairperson investigate and determine how that had happened, he went on to start manufacturing numbers rather egregiously. That's the challenge here. I'm not quite sure. The evidence available at the moment shows that results were changed in a vast number of places. And because results were changed in a vast number of places, it is impossible for anyone to come up with that. I mean, in the only states that witnessed an increase in turnout relative to 2019, I believe, were Abia and Lagos states. In every other state, turnout was down, including in Anambra State, whose son Peter Obi was running, and Adamawa State, whose son Atiku Abubakar was running, and in Kano, whose son Rabiu Kwankwaso was running. And then all that they would have people believe is that the turnout in Lagos improved because of people from the southeast of Nigeria, which is quite nonsensical because if the outcome in Lagos was as it was, or in all likelihood, much better than they eventually manufactured and adapted it to. It can only be because of people who come from the southwest of Nigeria, not because of people who come from the southeast, but that's a different thing. But no, I don't have any basis for thinking that as you have acknowledged, the issue is more important. You know, everyone is trying to pass off this thing as some kind of as the result of some kind of circumstances. It is not. It is willful. The manufacture of numbers and the writing up of results that had nothing to do with what happened at the polling units is itself was itself quite deliberate. And this is a problem with our elections, that increasingly elections are being done as ritualistic, performative things, and in which the various components bear no relationship to one another. So the registration of voters bears no relationship to the number of people you've got. And you see it. They told us this amount of people collected PVC, right? Now, meanwhile, of the number 87 million or whatever, that goes back to 2010, 2011 when election registration started. Millions of those have died since then. No, it's not possible that those people collected, dead people don't vote in Nigeria, supposedly. And therefore, all those millions, they tell you 87 or thereabouts million that collected PVC, over 20 million of them have died. If you just were to add up Nigeria's dead numbers, you know, annual death rate since 2011 in particular. So that's one. The number of people who vote bear no relationship to the number of people who are announced. And the number of people who turn out bear no relationship to turnout numbers. These guys have totally rendered the entire electoral value chain meaningless in Nigeria. So you can't even trust the statistics, the numbers that they produce, the electoral data. It's all quite, frankly, meaningless at this particular point. The public skepticism about the judiciary in Nigeria is very wide and very widely founded. People do not trust the judiciary, and for good reason. They've produced entirely fantastical outcomes recently, from anointing a man who came forth as the first to anointing people who did not at all run for primaries as candidates. The jurisprudence of the kinds of things Nigerian judges have been doing in elections would make Dr. Pella look like a choir boy. And the question whether the people who have been producing this kind of jurisprudence can be trusted to surprise us will only be left to them to decide. But you should also not forget something else, which is whatever happens, they will all live with the consequences of what they decide. I don't know, you would have seen judges, for instance, complaining about their pensions, right? A lot of judges retire and then start complaining that they did not pay their pensions, or they've not got their pensions 5 years later. And for some judges, 10 years, 15 years after they've retired, they get wheeled out in their advanced age. Some of them evidently quite ill, to go and identify themselves. And then the people complain on their behalf. I cannot complain on behalf of judges who have the opportunity to do the right thing and willfully decline to do so. Because when politicians who should not have been in office are wheeled into office on the basis of jurisprudence that should never come out of any court, what you have is that the judges who willed that person into office collected their benefits when they did it. That's sadly the situation. And by collecting their benefits when they did it, they gave up their rights to a life, a future life in safety, in security, and in dignity. So if that is what our judges want for themselves and for their grandchildren when they are very mature, by all means, let them inflict it on all of us. And because when they do, they're also inflicting it on themselves. And we're going to live with the consequences together. Frankly, you're asking the wrong person. You should ask Mahmoud Yakubu that question because he's the cause of everything. I don't, I mean, you're asking me now, how do you placate Nigerians? Did I manufacture the results? And why should Nigerians be placated for their mandate having been burglarized? I don't know how anyone answers that kind of question, so I'm not even going to engage with it. And it is the burglarizing of elections that leads to what you call animosities. Nigerians have been voting. Mind you, Nigerians have been sleeping with one another for a long time. You know, we intermarry, we interdate, we intersleep, and all of that. I don't think intertribal warfare has not arisen as a result of that. Murtala Mohammed married an Ajoke. Obasanjo has children across the Niger. Azikiwe has relationships in Yoruba land, in Lagos, amongst others. Emeka Anyoku is married in Ogun State. Babangida is married in Asaba. Atiku's wife is from Osun State, right? Peter Obi is married outside Igbo land. Tinubu is married in Ishekiri land. No? So we have relationships that cross boundaries across Nigeria, boundaries of ethnicity, of religion, of faith, of creed. It is injustice that leads to what you're talking about. And so let us not create narratives that I suspect are not well-founded. In fact, in Southern Kaduna, there is Southern Kaduna elected an Ekene to the National Assembly, and he defeated somebody, he defeated a Balerebe. That's fact. So I think some of these assertions have also got to be looked at in the light of some of the realities that are not dependent on INEC's narrative or narrative manufactured by INEC. I think that's what I would say to that. In some places, politicians have tried to whip up hate in order to suppress voting, to enable their thugs. That is true. But that was not because of animosity. That was manufactured hate. So I think it's important that we situate this within the larger narrative of the moment, rather than clutching at some straws, which I think some people would like us to do. Having talks to you about Dr. Pella here and Babalawos and about witches and wizards in one interview, I've got to say I'm none of those. So I cannot tell you what will happen in the immediate future. And what I can say is that people have quite clearly lost faith in the capacity of INEC to organize credible elections. And that, I think, was INEC's intention, because they wanted to create a domino effect after destroying people's faith in the governorship, in the presidential elections, for that to follow through so that you would have predictable, as in logical outcomes in the state level elections, which will follow the results they manufactured in the presidential elections. My hope is that people are going to defy them. That requires a lot of effort and a lot of organizing, and it's not going to be easy. But my hope is that people will defy them and continue to show up while people follow through on showing the evidence of their failure to comply with the Electoral Act in the elections that were organized on the 25th. All that people can do is to present the evidence And quite clearly, it's easy to, I'm not going to sit down here and try to demonstrate to you how that easily is done, because those who manufactured it will then try to begin to configure the landscape to respond to that kind of thing. There'll be time and place to do that. But for the elections coming up on Saturday, my hope is that people are going to be able to see that the country is being burglarized by a very narrow set of interests. Many of those interests have nothing to do with the public good. And uh, Nigerians have to continue to resist those interests until such a time when, hopefully, Nigerians get exactly the leadership they demand, because when they deserve, because when they do that as Nigerians, or when we do that as Nigerians, whoever that person is legitimately elected. And I think I've got to make this point. It's not about about particular people. It's not about Tinubu or P2B or Atiku or Kwankwaso or whoever. It is that whichever one of those is entitled to be elected credibly. And when the reason is that when you lack legitimacy, as is very manifest, because if INEC had done something proper, they would have not announced their results as a few minutes before 4 a.m. in the morning. They would have announced it when people could own it. And so when now whoever is announced shows up to exercise power, they cannot do anything because they lack political capital. And at the first sign of taking a difficult decision, the country will turn on them. And there is nothing they can do after that, because how many people are you going to kill when that happens? So the country will wait for the thieves and the burglars who have done this at the appropriate time, and the consequences will be self-evident unless things get corrected and legitimacy is returned to the process. And until then, we'll continue to labor under our delusions.